very good morning to everyone who has joined this morning. This is Siva from the Malaysian Institute of Management. Well, today is the 37th day of MCO, and I hope you and your loved ones are keeping well and safe. Sometime in the third quarter of last year, MIM collaborated with Augmented, which is a digital learning company that is headed by Mr. George Eveling, who is the Chief Reimagineer and CEO of Tech TMI Malaysia, to conduct this survey, which eventually reaffirms the human factor for an effective implementation of digital learning at the workplace. I also want to thank all those who have responded to this survey. And in the later part of this webinar, we will announce the winner of our lucky draw for the iPad mini, which comes in as a compliment from MIM and as an incentive for participating in the survey. Also, please take note that though this survey was conducted sometime in the later part of 2019, but the report was in the final drafting stage just before the MCO. Now, this 2020 Digital Learning in Asia is the second annual report. And this morning, I have the pleasure of Mr. George Eveling himself to present to you the key findings of this survey, which was conducted in Malaysia and Singapore. Over to you, George.
Good morning, Shiva. Thank you. And thank you you've got a wonderful team for helping to make this happen. Good morning, everyone. I'm sure everyone is enjoying each other's company and working out how to adjust to this new world. So I'd like to talk about how important this report is. When we started on our journey about 2.5, 3 years ago, we were trying to understand the world of digital learning. And we found that there was very little information on which to make decisions. So we embarked on a journey, and this ended up in a digital learning in Asia report last year and in this year. And this report is really important. We had a guy, a thought leader, Peter Senge, many years ago. He wrote a book, The Fifth Discipline, and he said the only sustainable advantage to an organisation's is an organisation's ability to learn faster than the competition. So this report is extremely important. It's about how do we develop a competitive advantage faster than those that we're in the market against. And from a national point of view, how do we move faster? And the world of digital opens up a huge number of opportunities for us to move more quickly than we have in the past. This presentation is going to be in two major components. The first is I'm going to explain to you a little bit about the world of digital learning. When I first went into this world, I was confused. There was such new terminology, and I was a little bit disempowered by all of this, all of the terminology. And if you look at this as we're all in a kitchen, so in Malaysia, I've lived here for 15 years now, food is a common factor for everyone. And so therefore, if we look at the spices that we've been using in a learning kitchen, there've been a limited range of spices. And now we have a new range of spices. They're the digital learning spices. And the aim is to be able to use those spices effectively to cook not great dishes, but effective learning. So the first part of this presentation is going to be to give you a very brief introduction to the world of digital learning. And then the second part is going to talk about the results. There is one key slide towards the end of this presentation, and that is the so what. What does this mean for organizations? What does all the data mean? So there's one key slide towards the end, which is really important for everyone. So let me talk about the world of learning. So the world that we are used to is traditional learning. It is classroom learning. It is fixed place, fixed time. You come to the classroom. We're now in a new world. It is a world of choice where the learning at least partly takes place on our laptop, on our mobile phones, our handphones, or our devices. So we're now in a world of anywhere, anytime learning. And when we combine the two, it is blended, partly face-to-face and partly mobile. Now, I have heard some organisations say we're going to get rid of all of our face-to-face training. And, you know, that was, I think in COVID times, there is an element of social distancing, but over time, face-to-face will still have a place in the learning ecosystem. So we've moved away from compulsion. You come to my classroom to, I wonder, does this person look anything like you? You've got your KPIs to meet. You've got your deadlines to meet. You've got a private life to attend to. You've got your meetings to attend to. You've got children, you've got family. So now you are juggling time. And in the new world of learning, you have choice. The learning will come to you, delivered to you on your mobile phone or on your laptop, etc. And what you're saying is, engage me. You're now competing for my time. Make it worth my while to spend my time on this learning. So now the world of learning, the control has moved, as you can see. It's moved from the teacher, from the training room, to the participant who's got the choice of what to do. Now, here is one of those words, ecosystem. Wow, you know, I first came across this word about 2.5 years ago, the new learning ecosystem. But we've got a traditional learning ecosystem. And if we look at these as spices in the learning kitchen, and the first spice was we engage our learners mainly through the trainer, mainly through the classroom. So there's an engaging and teaching component through the trainer. There's a learning reinforcement spice, and it was by coaching mainly through coaching. There is mentoring, and they might have online projects to do. And there is another element, it's the proving the impact spice. And these were 360-degree surveys, employee engagement surveys, or if you're doing sales training, sales results. Now let's look at the new kitchen. The kitchen with additional spices. And this is the digital learning kitchen. So there are many spices, there are many tools in this kitchen. And so therefore the question is, what are those spices? What are those tools? How do we combine them to create great learning and create learning transfer? What is the learning? What is the language in this new kitchen? So what I'm going to do very briefly, and I guarantee you, there's no test at the end of this, but it's to introduce you to some of the concepts so that you can understand what we're talking about in the survey a little bit later on. So we've got micro-learning. This is the bite-sized learning. It can be in video, it can be text, which comes to you. And the way of learning now, quite often it's video in short bite-sized chunks, micro-learning. Content libraries are critical. There's an expanding range of content available in video and text format. You know, many people are aware of LinkedIn Learning. There's Video Arts, there's Bookburn, there's Skiller, there is Udemy. There's an increasing range of content for organizations to assist their learners with. Then we have adaptive learning. And this is micro-learning whereby if you start answering questions, it will look at the questions that you're finding easy and finding difficult, and it will ask you the more difficult questions more often. It gets to know you through artificial intelligence. We are in a virtual classroom now. Zoom is doing extremely well out of COVID, and virtual classrooms are definitely on the increase. We've got WebEx, and you've got Adobe Connect, all sorts of platforms. We've got the gamification spice. How do we make learning a little bit of fun? How do we create challenges in this? And this is particularly relevant to the Gen Y and the Gen Z learners. Social learning. This is where learning is moving, just whereby it's dominated by the trainer, to it's like Facebook, where people are sharing what they're learning. It's the Facebook of learning. Well, I've learned this really cool thing. Let me share it with you. And it's moving towards learning from others as well as from your lecturer or your trainer. Augmented reality, which is a growth area. If you look at this Bombay Sapphire bottle, what would happen, this person zapped on the bottle on a little code, and then a recipe for how to use Bombay Sapphire to make mixes, and all these flowers came out. So it brings learning to life. And you've got virtual reality. So then we've got, getting closer to the end of this introduction, we've got online assessments whereby we actually can test whether people really understand the learning. And we can do that on a regular basis, much more regularly than we were able to do in a traditional world. And the second last one that I'll mention is analytics. Online learning, digital learning, gives L&D departments and HR departments an enormous knowledge and data in terms of what learners are learning and how much time they're spending on this. This is actually from an adaptive learning platform called Serigo. And Serigo will tell you, for example, how many learners actually remember this, not how many answered it correctly, how many remembered it, how many have engaged with the learning, which questions are they finding difficult. And then finally, there is a growth area. We've got the learning management platforms. You've got learning experience platforms like Edcast and Degreed. So we've got many, many new spices in the digital learning kitchen. Let me bring you back to 2.5 years ago. I attended my very first conference, digital learning conference. It was in Singapore. There were many exhibitors exhibiting their learning technology, and it was new to me, and I was dazzled, and I was rather confused as well. I spoke to the participants at the conference, and I thought I'd get a very sophisticated group of people, and they seemed confused. They didn't know how to use these new spices. I attended a conference, Learning Technologies 2018, my first time I attended it, then 2019 in London. And there were 240 exhibitors, all showing their learning technology. And it was amazing, dazzling, and confusing. Because I'm now confronted with all of these new learning spices, all of these learning tools. How do I use them? How do I choose between them? Then I spoke with the learners who attended this conference, and they were similar to me. They didn't have any frameworks. They weren't quite sure how to use it. Now, I will say that I believe Europe is, in terms of being able to use the spices, is a little bit ahead of Asia right now, but we will catch up. So what I did was I had a number of questions. Where is digital learning in Asia right now? Which technologies are being used? And I looked for data with the Elementrix team, and we couldn't find it. So we conducted a survey in 2018. And in 2019, we conducted another survey. I'd like to recognize Shiva for having the vision. Thank you for having the vision, for seeing the importance of this subject. You've been a wonderful partner to work with. You and your team have been a wonderful partner to work with on this survey throughout.
Good, George.
I'd like to also recognise Professor Keith Houghton. And Professor Houghton is based in Melbourne. He's a very well-known research professor in Australia. He's in the newspapers on a regular basis, on digital learning, in fact. Professor Keith Houghton was invaluable in helping to shape the survey and to analyse the survey and to make and to understand the key insights from the learning. So I'd like to thank Keith Houghton for what he's done to bring us to where we are. And we've done a survey in Singapore. In fact, we're able to compare Malaysia and Singapore. and we've partnered with the Singapore Institute of Management. And in mentioning Singapore, I will say the results from Singapore and Malaysia were very similar. So we did the survey. It was conducted in September, October last year. We had 203 valid respondents from Malaysia and 111 from Singapore. So what were we interested in? We were interested in how widespread is the use of these new spices in the learning kitchen? How widespread is the use of digital learning in Malaysia? To what extent are organised using? Which spices, which technologies are they using? What impact is this digital learning having? In other words, how tasty are the dishes? In our language, what is the impact on ROI and on learning transfer? What's stopping organisations from using more digital, more of these spices? And this is the important part. And this is one slide that I'm going to show you. What does it mean for HR and L&D? What's so important? What can we learn? How do we have to change? That is where the report adds a significant amount of value. So the first thing that we're interested in was how widespread is the use of digital learning in Malaysia? And Shiva, if I can hand over to you, we've got a poll to understand to get an idea of what you think, how widespread you think digital learning is in Malaysia. Shiva, can I hand over to you?
I'm going to launch the poll.
Okay, so we have, thank you, Shiva. The question is, what percentage of companies do you think in Malaysia have adopted digital learning to a significant extent? We'll leave you to make your best guesses.
That is pretty fast. We've got more than 50% who have participated. Okay, George, I will end here. We got about 100 over people who have taken this poll. Let me publish this and share the results.
Okay, so we were interested in the percentage of companies that are using digital learning significantly. It's a bit like if we were to ask what percentage of companies are using face-to-face learning significantly, we'd get almost 100%. So now it's using digital learning significantly. So what have we got? 0 to 10%. Some people think it's very little. We've got about we've got 26% of people who think it's up to 20%. 30% of people say that it's up to between 21 and 30. And then we've got 17% of people say that it's between 31 and 40, and 9% are over 40%. Okay. So what I'd like is a drum roll, please, because I'm going to show you what the results were. You're not bad. This group, Shiva, they're a pretty good group, actually.
Yeah.
They're not bad.
The mean is around 30%.
They're pretty good, most common. So what we found was there's a low but growing level of adoption of digital learning. So the percentage of companies that use digital to a very high extent is 32%. And that's we're at the beginning of the growth curve. We then asked participants, how much more do you think you'll be using this? And from this, we found that there is an anticipated 8% growth in the significant use of digital. Now, these results were in pre-COVID times. So we believe that whatever anticipations we've got, they're going to be exceeded. In fact, we asked, so they went from 8% growth between 2018, 2019. So the question is, what percentage do we think did people anticipate? Pre-COVID, there was an anticipation of a 16% increase in the significant use of digital learning. We believe that because this was done pre-COVID, this percentage is going to be significantly exceeded in the coming year. So we will be able to let you know this time next year. So then we were interested in which learning technologies are being used in Malaysia. So again, so there are a number of different learning technologies. So we'd like to understand, what do you think are the major learning technologies that are in use? So Shiva, can I hand over to you?
We will do the second poll.
Yes.
I'm going to launch this. And in fact, George, there was a question from one of the participants, asking this: what are some of the digital learning tools available in Malaysia for companies?
Wow, that's a big question. So the tools. Let people deal with this poll first, and then I will deal with this.
Okay, we got close to about 70% and I'll end the polling and I will share the results.
Yeah, thank you. So what we're saying is e-learning 60%. This group they're pretty good actually. E-learning 60% is the dominant one. Content libraries, very good. This group is pretty close to the mark. Learner engaging technologies 3%. Virtual classroom 17%. Emerging technologies. Actually, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, I've got to say. So let me go through this, and then we'll deal with that question that was asked. Right. So therefore, what we found was there's slow adoption of new learning technologies. In fact, the industry has not moved beyond traditional learning technologies in the last 12 months. So very good to the team. You correctly predicted that e-learning was the highest. In fact, e-learning is 75%. Traditional e-learning has been one way, but the learning management systems, they've been reinventing themselves and they've become much more interactive in how they operate. So this is partly a function of the increase in sophistication and user-friendliness of the learning management platforms. And now we've got learning experience platforms. Content libraries, yep, this was the second most important one. Then we've got virtual classrooms. It was the third one. Learner engaging technologies, gamification. It is adaptive learning, social learning, it's lower. And as you've correctly predicted, it's the augmented reality and the virtual reality. In answer to the question, what are the tools available? Well, it depends on what you're looking for. As we mentioned, there are micro learning platforms. And first of all, there are a number of ways of doing micro learning. You can do micro learning through services. So Video Arts, for example, will provide a video micro learning platform, or you can get companies like eLearning Minds in Malaysia. They will produce it for you, and they're a very good outfit to produce it for you. You've got content libraries. In many platforms offer content libraries. You've got Bookboon if it's in text format. You've got LinkedIn Learning, but that's rather long. Again, Video Arts is shorter. You've got Skiller, which is in video format. You've got the platforms that will help you produce your own, and they include Articulate, they include iSpring. So all you have to do is, you've got augmented reality. Our favorite is Zappa. We've got adaptive learning. We've got talent intelligence. Jackson Chia does a great job with gamification. And then we've got adaptive learning, which is Serigo. So I could go on and on, but it's really a matter for you to look at how do we want to put our spices together? Because if we just look at the technologies without learning how to mix them together, we won't create very good learning dishes. So therefore, we wanted to find out what's the extent of use. And we took percentages of how much of the technologies are being used in 2018, and then compared it to 2019. Now, if I was going to ask you, if you're going to the gym, and you've been going to the gym and you've been working at the gym, and if I was going to ask you, what sort of improvement would you expect between 2018 and 2019? Would you expect to have improved? Now, what we're finding is if you were to see that your results for a lot of these measures were constant, a little bit of rise on one, constant, it means you haven't advanced too much. And in fact, that's what we're finding in the use of the learning technologies in Malaysia and in fact in Singapore over the last year. There hasn't been the major burning platform. L&D is just starting to come to grips with it. And in fact, L&D, as we'll see, is not really structured for this. So the adoption of the new technologies, remember those 240 stalls that I went to in London? And not a lot of them are being used right now. Not a lot of those technologies are being used. So then it becomes, how satisfied are we with the ROI from digital learning? What impact is it having on learning? And the results on this one were actually inconclusive. Now, this is a major issue for organisations, and I'll tell you why when we get to the budget area. The L&D traditionally does not measure ROI on the business. It may measure the level 1, the Kilpatrick model. It could be happy sheets, learning evaluations, perhaps level 2, which is knowledge. Some organisations are doing level 3, which is impact on behaviour, but it's less common than perhaps it should be. So when C-suites of organisations are saying, you want more money, show me what impact it's going to have, it's very difficult to prove that. And we will come back to this. This is a big issue. So then it becomes, what are the key barriers to digital learning? And again, we'd like to ask you, Shiva, we've got a poll. We asked the question, what do you think the key barriers are to the implementation of digital learning? And we're going to ask you, we're going to give you a choice on the poll. What do you think the key barrier is to the implementation of digital learning? Let's say in your organisation. So which one of these are the key barriers to the implementation of digital learning, you know, in Malaysia, or you could even make it easier in your organisation?
Okay, George, we're almost coming to that.
101.
Okay. I think this is an important question, so I'll just wait until about 80%.
Yes. Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, close 150 now. Okay, we have got about 80% of the respondents, 82, so I will, 82%. So I will end the polling now and share the results with you.
Okay, thank you, Shiva. So the top one is getting learners to embrace digital learning. So let me say in digital learning, there are two sides, I should say. There is a supply side, those that design and implement the digital learning, that's the L&D departments and the designers of the learning. And there's the demand side, which are the learners. Now remember, the learners are the people who are juggling time because they've now got a choice. So what you're saying here is getting learners to embrace digital learning in a world of choice. That's the dominant one. The second one, there are two others. It's L&D competency gap. Yes, that's an important one. We'll talk about that. Lack of IT support. Yes, that is an issue that's been raised by a number. Change management. Yes, that's 11%. Lack of support from other stakeholder departments. And this is an interesting one. The one that ranked low was L&D does not know how to market digital learning. Well, in fact, that's an important issue that we'll talk about later on in that very important, one of the last slides that I'm going to talk about. So what did we find in the survey? So lack of IT support was 62%. L&D competence gap is 60%. In other words, there was 60% of respondents felt that the L&D competence gap was a barrier to the implementation of digital learning. Getting learners to embrace digital learning was an important one, 56%. Change management, as you can see, L&D does not know how to market digital learning and lack of support from other departments. Now, we looked at this data and then we were trying to look at what's the root cause behind this. Now, if we were going to put our finger on one root cause, what would it be? And we have identified that the L&D competence gap is the root cause barrier here. Remember, there's a supply side and there is a demand side. And the supply side is to design engaging learning. It is to design useful learning. It is to interest learners in the learning. So therefore, if learners are, if they're not engaging in the learning, it's either because it's not engaging, it's not useful, or they don't know about it. The change management is a critical one. It is the L&D needs to understand how to influence senior management. It needs to understand how to influence managers to participate. It needs to know how to influence learners. It needs to understand a new skill is change management, as we will see. We will see that the skills required of L&D need to be significantly broadened. And lack of IT support. IT is when there are major systems issues, IT is required. However, L&D needs to, as we'll see, understand how to evaluate learning technologies on its own. It cannot rely on IT for this.
But George, if you just go back to the slide before, I just want to point out that this is precisely the same order that is lack of IT, L&D competence. It's the same order that we see for the survey in Singapore in the report. It is just only the percentage, like for example, L&D gap is 60 in Malaysia, Singapore is 58, lack of IT is 62 in Malaysia, Singapore is 53, but the order is of the same.
Thank you, Shiva. Thank you for that observation. Yeah. So therefore, if I said to you, you know, these are percentages of competency gaps. Now, if I said to someone in your team has got a 55% competency gap, would you be happy? If I said to you, someone on your team has got a 65% competency gap, a 70%. So what we wanted to know was what percentage in terms of the digital learning, what percentage competency gaps are there? And this is what we found, that there are high levels of competency gaps in virtually all of the learning technologies. The one that was a bit lower was the learning management systems. So we've got artificial intelligence, that's understandable. Artificial intelligence is on the increase. Virtual reality and augmented reality, these are new. But then we get into these learning technologies that are going to become much more mainstream. Adaptive learning is going to become much more mainstream, certainly e-learning. Virtual classrooms are going to be so common even within the next 6 months. So we've got high levels of lack of competence in putting together the spices in the new digital learning kitchen. So the question is, what sort of dishes can we create if we don't understand the use of the dishes? So therefore, Shiva, are there any questions that you'd like me to address so far?
Maybe perhaps after this slide.
Okay, because I think Kanag's has got his hand up as well, if I saw as well. So we looked at a number of people have got their hands up, the competency barriers. So we're looking at what are the competency barriers within L&D. And there are a number of competency barriers. In fact, if we put this another way, what are the key competencies of learning and development in the digital learning kitchen? And we've identified them as three. Remember, there is a supply side. These are the suppliers so that you can satisfy the demand side. And the first one is learner engagement. We need to understand our learners. We need to develop engaging learning for learners, because it's a bit like you and YouTube. If you go to a YouTube video and you don't find it interesting, what do? On your phones every day, if you find that there's content that's not interesting, what do? So it's about engaging learners and getting them interested in the learning to keep coming back. A second critical competency is to understand learning technology. There are so many learning technologies coming out that we cannot rely on IT departments. We've got a client now, and this is not a learning development issue, but they're relying on their IT department to assist them. The IT department is not going to assist them because of their workload for 2 years. L&D departments cannot wait for such a long time. There are times that IT is important when it's big systems integration, but there are many technologies that L&D can investigate and experiment with on its own. And this is a structural change. It is getting your people to feel comfortable with this, with learning technology. I attended a conference in Rome, and there's a guy called Peter Hope from Schindler, and he's the Chief Learning Officer. And Schindler has been very successful in digital learning. And he made a comment which really stuck in my mind. He said two things. The structure of my department has changed in the last 18 months very significantly. The second thing that he said was, I've become a digital change agent. So he's found that he's moved from being a traditional learning and development executive to a change agent, and he's having to adapt the structure of his department to be successful in the new digital learning kitchen. Okay, so Shiva, were there any questions that you wanted to raise at this stage?
Yep, I would like to ask, the participants, if you got any questions, please key it into the Q&A session, and I will bring that up. And I think the learner engagement becomes very important, George, and if people do not want to use the digital tools that we supply, then the efforts of the organization, in terms of spending on the licensed content is all wasted,
That's exactly correct. And look, I've seen a lot of mistakes that are made. There's one organisation that brought on a major learning platform, spent a lot of money on it, and they said, we're going to convert our training to digital. And then we did research. They were saying, why are our people not engaging with this? And then the learners are saying, well, it's not really, it's not engaging, or I didn't know about it. In other words, L&D, the challenge is to understand learners much more than they've had before. I attended a conference in London, and there was a successful case study from a person who was successful, her organisation was successful in digital learning. She said, we have to spend an enormous amount of time with managers to understand them so that we can understand what they need in their learning. How do they consume the learning? I had another organisation, and I was talking to a factory manager, and he said, L&D needs to understand how my fact choice. So if I just move on.
George, there's another question just before we move on, this is from Rahima. It says that, if the gap for L&D is more than 60%, can they be trained to bring them up to speed?
What a wonderful question. The answer is yes. That is like a knockout question. You're talking about one of my hobby horse's favorite subject. L&D, let me tell you a story. I was with an organization and I was with a senior L&D person and one a bit younger. I said to the older one, what do you think, what's your attitude to digital? And this person said, I'm scared. And I said to the other person, what do you think, the younger one? She said, I'm excited. Because the older ones, they've got their learning paradigm. This is how we do things. But this person is prepared to go through a relearning process. What was true in the world of traditional learning is different. There are frameworks. In fact, we have frameworks that we give organisations and L&D professionals to help them understand the new world. If I was going to say to you, tell me the GROW model. Oh yeah, GROW. So what are your goals? What's the reality? What are your options and what's next? You have models. But if I was going to say to L&D professionals, what's your model for developing digital learning strategies or digital learning journeys? They won't have them. They do exist. So the answer is yes. I will say there is one other thing that I'm seeing in Malaysia, and this is a major mistake. It is seeing that we've got traditional learning and we're getting a lot of virtual learning, virtual classrooms, but the paradigm is all I have to do is transfer my method of learning from the traditional world. If I do exactly the same in the virtual world, I'm successful. That is a major error. It's a major error. But you'll get me going. This will get me going for the next hour and a half, Shiva, so I better move on.
There are another 3 more questions. Let's take them quickly.
Okay.
The second one is from Anwar, and I find it strange. He says that he finds it strange that L&D has such a huge competency gap in digital learning. However, this is not the case with faculties at universities. I know that augmented reality is very much part of teaching and learning in universities. Why is that so?
Well, actually, I was talking to I'm not sure what the situation is in Malaysia, but we've got a very good friend who is a senior person at one of the big 8 universities. And she said, we're going online, but it's an absolute mess. We don't know how to do it. In fact, Professor Keith Houghton has written major articles on the Australian scene, which is saying that there is mass confusion on how to do it. So in universities, what they do is they deliver online education, and that might be tending to be one way. And there might be some, as I said, I'm not totally aware of the university situation. But certainly a lot of, if we talk about delivering digital learning experiences versus just online education, which is one way, I'm not sure that we're that advanced. So I'd be happy to have a debate on that at some point in time. So, but in universities, perhaps they've been using online to save costs, but certainly in the conventional world, this has not been there hasn't been a major emphasis on it at all. But I will question the level of sophistication of universities, even in Malaysia, in terms of providing rich learning experiences with social learning, applying gamification principles. I would be interested to see practical best case examples of that in Malaysia.
George, when you talked about gamification, there was also a question earlier posed by Aishu from ACCA. She said, I'm surprised to see that gamification has declined.
So am I. Yeah, so am I.
Yeah.
So that was a surprising result because, yeah, that surprises me as well.
Right. And the other question is from Arvind Kumar. It says that in your experience, what are the interventions we can support L&D, HR to minimize their competency gap? And what has been the outcomes of these interventions?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. The number one, it's, we'll talk later, you know, in association with MIM, with Elementrix, we've partnered with a digital learning consultant in London, and we actually provide support and training for organisations to become more competent. So there is training available to do that. The impact of digital learning in Malaysia, as I said, it's because the impact measures do not exist right now. We're at the very early stages of becoming more sophisticated in understanding impact. So at the very early stages right now of impact analysis. Thank you, Arvind.
There's one last question before I let you go on to the next slide is, should we focus on upskilling the L&D community as a first phase in moving forward in the implementation for the organizations? And similarly, how do we train the trainers in the organization?
Well, there are some real killer questions being asked. The answer is yes. The root cause is upskilling L&D. L&D, what we're finding is that L&D is doing things because they've got to do things. They buy some content, but they don't have a framework around it. So yes, I agree. Upskilling of L&D, it should be the number one priority in, and there are different organizations, organizational needs. One is to be able to understand a framework to implement, design and implement digital learning. Other organizations have got internal trainers. It's about helping them to learn how to design their own virtual training, how to deliver their own virtual training. So that's a great question. The answer is yes. That's the number one priority. If we don't do that, we won't get engaged learners.
Josh, this again, back to gamification, you know, we were quite equally surprised that there's a decline, you know, in the areas of on the demand for gamification. But Shantini has asked, you know, in your opinion, why is gamification not very popular?
Gamification is an emerging technology. So I expect that, and so therefore it's about what's been in the market for quite a long time. So gamification will increase over time, but it's for the market to start taking momentum. This is how social movements start. It is about one L&D practitioner talks to another, and the other says, I'm using gamification. Oh, right, okay, so let me try it. And so therefore it becomes a movement when more and more are using it. So we're still at the start of that movement. And literally, you see very quickly the movement in terms of virtual classrooms, it's exploding now, right? So it will increase. All of these technologies will increase. Adaptive learning will increase, but it will take time. It's when L&D practitioners start talking to other L&D practitioners and they see, for example, the Seragos of the world, they're working. So they'll move faster over time.
Okay, Josh, with that, I want to thank all those who have asked those questions and let you move on with your presentation.
Thank you. Great questions. Thank you. Really good questions. Now, this is a big issue. 61% of respondents said that budget limitations are a barrier to the implementation of digital learning. So over time, digital can reduce training costs. In the beginning, it will require an investment of different types of people, for different types of skills and upskilling as well, and investment in the technologies. For example, at a big end, some organisations are investing in major, learning experience platforms. Some are going into Edcast or the Degrees of the world. That's a significant investment. Others are using other micro-learning platforms. Now, this is the issue. I was talking to a learning and development practitioner from a major organisation, and I said the issue that we've got is that C-suites want to see the ROI. She said, tell me about it. I can't get budget because my CFO says, show me the business case. And this is a very big issue. So what we're finding is the key blocker in most organizations is C-suites and CFOs say they make decisions based on ROI. What's the ROI? As we know, ROI is not collected. So this is a major insight from Professor Houghton, in fact, and it was that moving into digital learning is more of an organizational philosophy issue. Organizations at C-suites need to make decisions on to go into digital learning and to budget for it based on a vision for a future rather than, and so it's a forward vision for a digital future rather than looking backward on proof for ROI. There is a wonderful case study, you know, a DBS in Singapore. It is celebrated in Singapore and in Asia and globally. And the CEO, Piyush Gupta, he made a decision. He said, we're going global. We're going digital, I should say. We're going digital. And that decision took hold. The whole organization went digital. There was no question. They are an award-winning organization, award-winning bank, because of a vision for the future. So there's a major lesson here for senior leadership teams. So this is the really important slide, right? This is, what does this mean? So what? So what? So this is the so what. So going digital. Now this is, I've got one after this, which is extremely important. Going digital is more human than it is technological. So we've got, remember my 240 exhibitors, they've got all the technology, and guess what? The sophistication of the technology is increasing. The range of the technology is increasing. And the issue that's holding this back is the ability to put it together, to learn how to put those learning spices together to create great learning transfer, to create great learning dishes. We know that technology is expanding fast, and it's unbelievable what's happening in the market right now. The key barrier is human. It's the competence of L&D, it's fear factors within organizations. And to move forward, we need organizations and L&D in particular, needs to be willing to unlearn. That's a major challenge. So here are the new competencies for L&D, which will require a new structure for L&D. It is to understand learners, to engage and to add value to them. So what does that mean? So this, remember there's a supply side and there's a demand side. If you look at Steven Spielberg develops movies so that he needs to understand his audience first. So he engages in audience research. You will find the concept of human-centered design becoming much more common, and a common skill that's required among learning teams. Understand your learners as never before. There's the ability to understand, well, here are the various technologies, and there is offline, which is the traditional learning, which will still exist, and there is online, which is the learning technologies. So it's about how do we put those together to design useful learning journeys. I spoke to a head of a major research organization, Fosway, and he said most L&D practitioners, even in Europe, are confused. So what they need is frameworks of thinking so that they can engage in their digital learning with confidence, design. Attract learners. Now, I noticed that in this survey, in this group, this was given a relatively low priority. Learning how to market digital learning is a major skill that L&D needs to adopt. The skill is that we need to learn how to market. When I did research within one organization, we asked, why didn't you adopt the learning? They said, oh, well, the communication didn't tell me what's in it for me. Or they sent me one email and I might have missed it. You need to become campaign marketers for your digital learning because people have got choice. The best examples that I've had of digital learning, one in the UK and one in Malaysia with Maxis under Munir Azuzi at that time, both heads came from marketing backgrounds. L&D needs to employ people who are comfortable with learning technology. I've mentioned that before. That's a critical element. And the final element is it's the ability to develop change management skills. So to influence the senior leaders, influence learners, and influence managers. So the role of L&D will change. It will be augmented, I should say. There are new skills and there'll be a push for a new structure within L&D. So Shiva,
would you just take this question, and this is from Abdul Samad. He says, on return of investment, Kirkpatrick advocates ROE, return of expectations. The challenge is to get the leadership to understand ROE versus ROI. What kinds of discussions need to be held with senior management in the C-suite level to get them on board?
That's another, look, if I could award gold stars for questions, every person who asked a question would get a gold star. The benefit of digital is you now have a much higher degree of analytics than ever before. There are input measures. It is how much are people engaging with the learning, and with well-structured digital learning, we're moving from a paradigm of I engage people in the classroom to a paradigm of I'm proving that this is being used in the workplace. So digital opens up the analytics and which enables us to engage in conversations with the C-suite. And also when we change paradigm, move away from this, I've got to create happy learners, to I'm creating happy organizations because the learning is being applied. That's a paradigm change.
Okay, George, just to remind you, we are running short of time, so let's move on.
Okay, great, thank you. So therefore, I will say this, the world of digital learning, elephants are smart and they move relatively quickly. I wouldn't try to outrun an elephant. So L&D departments, they're moving relatively quickly. But now, post-COVID, you're going to find that we move a lot more quickly. And the predictions that we made in the report, they will be, I believe, what we said in terms of growth and usage is going to be overshot. If I may continue, Shiva, because we've got limited time.
Go ahead.
Okay, so it's an exciting journey ahead. Be prepared to unlearn, relearn, restructure. So I'd like to thank you for your participation. Thank you for the great questions.